profit. So the SEC moved one step further and they said, we're going to look at what the investors are investing in. So then I get the question, well, some people are buying it because they want to vote. Great, but the majority of the people are buying it because they want to profit. There's a very broad interpretation. The courts have looked at this very broad. You can't call the SEC and ask. I've tried. What they do is they say, ask your attorney. And I say, I am the attorney. So they won't issue a no action letter, which is basically you call and ask them something and they'll respond, because they're just not going to do that. So another thing to consider is the states have their own rules. So even if you comply with all of this, the state might do something different. I had a client in Texas. We met the Howey test. We were good. And the Texas regulators came in and said, but if you looked at our test, and we looked at it and said, oh, crap, yeah. So, and then the last thing to remember is the SEC isn't the only plaintiff out there. There are plaintiffs' lawyers out there who are just salivating. I've sat on a panel with one guy, and he is just giddy because the number of class action lawsuits that we have in the works are just endless. So, anyway, so rest in peace to the utility token in the United States. It's not going to happen. So what that means is we've got to have regulated ICOs. And those are largely done under the Jobs Act. As was mentioned earlier, 506C. 506C is anytime you sell a security, it has to be exempt from registration. It has to either be registered, which is like a public offering, you have to file with the government, you have to prove it, or there has to be an exemption. Most people raise capital under an exemption. 99% of the capital is raised under an exemption. 506C came out under the Jobs Act, and it basically says you can advertise, you can put it on a blimp, you can put it on the internet, you can sell your stock, you can sell your bonds, you can sell your securities, but all of the investors have to be accredited. That means they have to be generally high net worth individuals. So a lot of the ICOs that are done now, T0 did an ICO, they've raised over $100 million, and they did it under 506C. Now, those tokens that they sold, they're restricted, meaning you can't go put them on an exchange. In fact, you can't do anything with them for 12 months. So that's an option, not great, but it's an option. You can do a public registration, do an S1, or a filing with the SEC. It's really expensive, it's really time consuming. There's been 2 filed, they aren't going anywhere. Regulation 8+. It also came out under the Jobs Act. This is kind of supposed to be the silver bullet for these. I'm working on several of these right now, and they allow issuers to sell up to $50 million of securities to anybody out there. They're tradable, and so you can put them on an exchange. But this has to be approved by the SEC. There's several in with the SEC right now. None have been approved yet. Excuse me. We're crossing our fingers and hoping that we get some traction here. There are problems with it because one of the beauties of blockchain and ICOs is the anonymity. I can buy and sell cryptocurrencies, nobody knows who I am. If you're selling, buying, and selling securities, that just doesn't work. People need to know who you are. Regulation crowdfunding allows people to sell up to $1 million. U.S. companies, if you do it through a portal like Lehnhof, Indiegogo, Start Engine, Seed Invest. But there's been a few companies that are trying this, but $1 million ICO is paltry these days. So not a lot of action there. Regulation allows offshore people. And one of the big problems is to avoid being a public company, you have to be less than 2,000 investors. So with these ICOs, they're selling to hundreds of thousands of people. So that's problematic. So again, we have a way, it's not great. So I've been approached by some people that have called me and said, hey, we did an ICO, we've sold all these tokens, we don't think we were compliant, what should we do? And I said, you know, good in orange, I hope so. No, the idea there is let's go back and let's try to make you compliant going forward, let's try to clean this up. 2018, I think, is going to be an interesting year. There's going to, Gary Gensler was in the Obama administration. He said that we're going to see these ICOs are going to have to come into compliance with U.S. securities laws. And that's what I'm telling you. That's what I've told people from the beginning. That's what the lawyers have been telling people from the beginning. Entrepreneurs don't love that because it does stifle innovation. It goes against the beauty of the blockchain. And I agree. I think that we're trying to shove this brand new technology into a set of laws and regulations that are almost 100 years old. We're operating under the 1933 Act and the 2012 Jobs Act, which seems really outdated now. You know, fast forward a whole 6 years later, I don't think they even contemplated blockchain technology at that time. Way back when, 6 years ago. So, I think the future is, will tell. Like I said, I've had the opportunity to speak a lot. I get asked a lot of questions, and I found myself more over the last year saying, I don't know. Which isn't super comforting hearing your counsel say that, but that's the fact of the matter is a lot of us don't know. I was with a bunch of top securities lawyers at a conference in LA last week, and we were sitting around a table, and we were all lamenting that none of us really have a solid idea, and we were batting around ideas like, what if we tried this, what if we tried that? The problem with these entrepreneurs like yourself is you're all so smart, and you come up with way too complicated questions for us, and I find myself just like sitting there and like these little fizzles in my brain going, I can't process that because I've heard more about, well, what if, or what about this, or what about that. Hopefully we can come up with answers, but I think it's time to update the 1933 Act and create a 2020 Act which contemplates blockchain and distributed ledger. Some states are trying to do it. Wyoming has embraced, has created laws where they said, hey, we'll allow you to do ICOs in our state. They won't be securities. You don't have to pay taxes on it. You don't have to register as a money service, or MSB, a money service business. You don't need any licenses to come. It's the wild, wild west, free for all here, which is fantastic for companies in Wyoming that want to get investors from Wyoming. Besides that, I don't know. I've had lots of clients reincorporate there, and I said, great. I don't know where you're going to get the investors, but that's fantastic. But other states are coming on board. Delaware did something really cool where they allowed you to basically tokenize shares. So that means rather than having uncertificated stock or a stock ledger, you could have a Class T preferred share. So that's something that a lot of my clients are doing now, where we're amending their articles so that they have a Class T token that will be sold. It's just like a preferred share, but it's tokenized. It'll be, once they buy it, it'll go sit in their wallet. They can't trade it because it's restricted, but it's a tokenized share. So anyway, questions? I sped through that really fast, but that was
Marty, I want to take advantage of you and ask the first question here.
Yeah.
First of all, how's it going in Korea and Japan, where it kind of started in those places? Are they facing the same issues? Has it been taken advantage of by scam artists and things like that? The second question is, in the U.S., is it because, a lot of this because of investment banks and the traditional service providers for stocks and those things like that, are they trying to put the stop to this because they're not getting what they want from it?
So I'll answer your second question first. Here in the United States, kind of like myself, I think there was resistance at first saying, oh, this is something that it's not real. All of the large investment banks now are either developing practices or have committed to a practice that is cryptocurrencies. I mean, everybody from Goldman Sachs to JP Morgan Chase, they all have a crypto division. You're seeing large hedge funds and mutual funds come up that are investing in nothing but crypto. I helped put a few of those together. So there's definitely that movement. With respect to Asia, it's a little bit schizophrenic because what happens, especially, so Korea will come out and say, we welcome it, we're good, and then some other department will say, hold up. And that's kind of gone back and forth. They're trying to be friendly, but they have their version of the SEC too. So does Japan, so does France. All of these countries that are saying, we want to be crypto friendly, they're all kind of coming back to the fact that, hey, we still have to protect investors. And it's interesting because you go to these ICO conferences and you'll hear people talk about a fraud coin, and they'll say that, and you'll hear that on Telegram, this is a fraud coin. Because fraud is rampant in this. You'll also hear people talk about a crap coin, which is just basically, this is based upon a really bad business model, if any business model at all. So you have to protect the investors, and so that's the look, and I just broke that with batteries, so sorry. So they're wrestling with that idea of how do we protect investors, but how do we make sure that we promote this. A lot of the countries, though, are just basically turn a blind eye. I know that, and that's what's been done in a lot of these countries where you've seen it flourish. China has gone, they basically said we're banning all ICOs. So if you're from China, you can't invest there. And I know there are people that do. Hong Kong's been very kind of open-minded, and a lot of the exchanges are based there. Malta has become kind of the country du jour, and a lot of Bitfinex and a few of the other exchanges have actually relocated to Malta. It's also a big offshore gambling hub, so anyway. So I think there's some irony there. Anyway.
Question? Okay.
Yeah.
So you talked about a one-year holding period on, I think it was a Reg D offering. So once the 1 year expires, can those tokens be freely traded to any willing buyer and seller, or do they need to stay within the accredited circle? So that's question one. And then under Reg S, if you sell overseas, can those ever come back and be traded to U.S. citizens, or do they need to forever remain outside the U.S.?
So with regards to Reg D offering restricted securities, so the restrictions will lapse after 1 year. And typically what you would have with stocks is then you have to go, you get an attorney to write an opinion letter that Rule 144 or 41 have been met, and that the restriction on the securities no longer apply, and they can be freely traded. With smart contracts, now you could build that into the smart contract so that after a 1 year holding period and these other qualifications, because there's also limitations on how much can be traded and sold at any given time, you can build all that in a smart contract and they can be sold to anybody. With regards to Reg S, you have to, there's a holding period. You can only sell outside the United States. It's a similar 12-month period. And then then you can sell to accredited investors in the future. So there's similar restrictions, and Reg S kind of depends on there's the type of instrument, whether it's debt, whether it's equity. So it depends on how it will be structured with that token and how it's classified. Right behind her.
I'm sorry.
In trying to get it in compliance with the SEC, will the ICOs be required to make it right by investors, as in not, like, could they just shut down and you lose all the money, and that does SEC actually hurt the investors, or would they have to make it right and return some of the money?
So I think that if you did a non-compliant ICO, you raise capital, I mean, that's, the SEC could make you come in and basically not only ping you with fines and penalties, but they could make you do what's called a rescission offer, where you have to go and get the money back, which could be problematic. I think that there's the SEC, but then, like I said, there's also plaintiffs' attorneys out there who are going to make you give the money back plus. So I think that if it's been done, a lot, like I said, $8 billion has been raised, and 99% of that's been unregulated. I think that this happened because it prospered in this unregulated atmosphere, and regulators not only in the United States but across the world are trying to figure out how do we get this under control to protect investors, but also we want to be able to, we don't want to stymie innovation, we want to encourage companies to be able to